These are the words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, one of the priests, who were in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. Those are the opening words of the Old Testament book of Jeremiah, one of the major prophets, not just because of the length of the book, but because he's writing, like Ezekiel, at a period in Israel's history which is critical to the future of the nation. In fact, arguably, maybe 1948 and the establishment of Israel as a nation is the only other date that compares to what Jeremiah is writing to. Now, as I read those opening words, they probably went like this over your head. So let me start right off the bat. We're going to have to put some background in here in order to make it understandable, but the book is so rich that it's worth the explanations. And just hang with me and we'll make it as simple as possible. The opening words here are really setting the date. The third verse says, "It also came in the days of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, and until the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the captivity of Jerusalem in the 5th month." That's a really fancy way of saying he's writing in 627 BC till 586 BC, when the temple is ultimately destroyed and the southern tribe of Judah is taken into captivity into Babylon. Time out. What are we talking about? God's people, Israel, existed as 12 tribes. 10 of the tribes lived in northern Israel, called Israel. The southern tribe, Judah, lived in the south, called Judah, but sometimes referred to as Israel, so you've got to keep them separate. So wait a second, there were 12 tribes, that's only 11. 10 in the north, 1 in the south. Did we miss a tribe? No, the tribe of Levi did not get any land, so it's not numbered there, so we're really not missing any tribes. So they existed as 12 tribes. King David united the empire. King Solomon, his son, also had a united empire, but it fractured after him. The 10 northern tribes became a political entity, and the 1 southern tribe was its own entity, and that was Judah. Jeremiah is writing to both Israel and Judah, but primarily to Judah. Because by the time Jeremiah starts writing, and remember, the opening verses gives us the chronology, 627 to 586, the northern tribes are already beaten up by the mean, nasty Assyrian Empire who had been in control. Just think of them as the Klingons of the Old Testament. They came in, they were professional terrorists, they terrorized everybody, they took them over, they took them out of the land, they taxed them like crazy, and they just, basically terrorized people. There's motifs and bas-reliefs that are now in the British Museum of the Assyrians attacking the city of Lachish in southern Israel at one point and flaying the Jews alive and pulling their skin off with poles to terrorize the people locked in the city. These are mean, nasty people, these Assyrian Empire. And because of the sin of the northern tribes, Israel, God allowed the Assyrians in 722 BC to take them captive. That's bad news for everybody, including the one remaining tribe, Judah, because the way Judah remained out of the Assyrian grasp is by paying them off. They were a vassal state. This is prior to Jeremiah. But what happens now is history starts to change, as it does maybe every 500 years, and you don't really know that it's about to change. But this is one of those cruxes. 500 years after this, history will change again when Jesus comes. 500 years after that, the Roman Empire falls and slips into the Middle Ages. 500 years after that, you get the separation of the East and the Western churches. 500 years after that, you get the Great Reformation of the church. 500 years after that, it's now. Now, I'm not saying prophecy. I'm just noticing what other scholars have noticed, that every 500 years or so, the world shifts a lot. And it was shifting in Jeremiah's time. And I would say it's shifting now. The advent of globalization and technology, this united world is more united now than it has been since the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. We share economies and politics and society and thoughts and technology and money and even Google Translate. And so what happens is the world is changing. And the world was changing when Jeremiah wrote. Now here's why the world was changing. Assyria was loosening its grip because a new kid was on the block. And the new kid was called Babylon. Now, Babylon had just been a backwater place. If you remember the war with the first Iraq War, And we were fighting against the Iraqis. And by the way, Babylon would be where Iraq is today. There was this group of people called the Marsh Arabs. Those were the biblical Chaldeans who became the Babylonians. And they were just a backwater people. But all of a sudden, they started to rise in power. And they rose, particularly under King Nebuchadnezzar. And so by 605 BC, they are a formidable force. In 612 BC, the Babylonians destroyed the capital of Assyria, which was Nineveh, and became the strong kid on the block. That crumbling of the Assyrian Empire and the slow rise of Babylon created a political vacuum where Judah thinks, we don't have to pay the money anymore. We have a degree of independence. We just have these big empires on our doorstep. The Assyrians, we're not worried about them anymore. Let's keep the Babylonians at bay. And in order to do that, let's be friends with the Egyptians. Because the Babylonians and the Egyptians are on opposite sides of where Israel was. And Israel's like a ping pong ball between the two. So the kings of Israel, Josiah, for example, and then Jehoiachin, they are trying to play one off against the other. And in that political vacuum, what's happening is Israel's finding room to breathe. Judah, in particular, is finding room to breathe. I think everything's okay. That's the first thing that's happening, the first change. But there's another change, and it's going to happen starting in 605 BC. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, comes and surrounds Jerusalem. Jeremiah begins to prophesy to the leaders of Jerusalem, you must surrender to the Babylonians. This is God's punishment for your idolatry. But the leaders won't listen to Jeremiah. They're thinking in their minds, no, God wouldn't abandon us. He promised our forefather David there's always be a king. So they hardened their hearts. Jeremiah is telling them, your world's about to change. You think everything's fine. It's not fine. There are global issues that are great tectonic shifts. And this is happening by God. And so when you see those opening verses of Jeremiah, he's writing between 627 and 586. Jerusalem's surrounded in 605 BC. Nebuchadnezzar takes captive some of the people in Jerusalem. If you're familiar with Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were all taken captive in 605 BC to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, puts a puppet king in place in Jerusalem, but he rebels. We'll meet him during the book of Jeremiah. So Nebuchadnezzar comes back and beats him up again in 597 BC, 596, and puts another puppet king in there. Zedekiah will be his name. He's the last of the kings. Well, he rebels again. This time Nebuchadnezzar gets really mad. And in 586 he comes and he destroys the temple, dismantles the temple, slaughters the people of Jerusalem. The blood was flowing in the streets. And he brings the children of Israel into captivity in Babylon for 70 years. Those are two great tectonic shifts. No one would have ever expected it. Assyrian Empire, Babylonian Empire creates a vacuum. Jerusalem creates catastrophe. Boom! Israel is yanked out of the land. But not just to any land. They'll be yanked out to Babylon. Now, Babylon is the bad boy of the Bible. We first are introduced to Babylon, or Babel, in Genesis 10:10. Its founder was a guy named Nimrod. Why anyone would name their baby Nimrod, I don't know. But even to this day, you call somebody a Nimrod, it's not a compliment. Nimrod was the founder of Babylon, or Babel. And it's there with the tower in Genesis 11, where man tried to reach to God and be God all over again. And Babylon becomes, historically, that place. I call it Hell's Kitchen. I call it Hell's Kitchen because it is like that area that used to be in New York. That was a tough area. It is the headquarters of Satan's kingdom on earth. You'll see it again in the book of Revelation when Babylon, the mystery prostitute, is revealed as really Satan's headquarters. So for God's people to be yanked into Babylon is a huge deal. This is not just a minor political or military skirmish. This is what appears to be the destruction of God's people. And Ezekiel, writing at the same time, will see the glory of the Lord depart from the temple. For 70 years, Jeremiah tells us that Israel will remain in Babylon. And when they finally do come out under the Persian Empire, only a remnant comes trickling out. And they'll come back to the land, but not like they were. They won't have a king. They'll be under Persian domination, then under Greek domination, and ultimately under Roman domination, and constantly being beaten up until 70 AD when they're thrown out of the land again, this time by the Romans, not coming back as a nation until 1948. So these opening verses of Jeremiah that set the chronology are really giving us quite a background. It's a very critical historical period. And as we go through this text, and this, by the way, is ESV publishes this, Crossway Books. On one side, you have the English translation. On the other side, you can write all your notes. And so you'll see me holding it up from time to time. You can buy this on the Crossway site. And I use it because it's a great way to keep your notes. So if you see me doing this, I'm just reading things I had written to myself. Let me go back to where I started. We're picking Jeremiah because his message is relevant to us today. Now, most of us are not Jewish. I'm Italian. That makes me a Gentile. The Bible divides the world into Jews and Gentiles. So most of us in the church today in particular are Gentiles. And so it's not a one-to-one correspondence here. But I am a believer in Jesus. And in that way, I am a representative of his kingdom. We are his people. And we do live at a very critical time in history. Now, how God deals with his church is often different than how he deals with Israel because of the cross. He deals with great love and mercy, but sometimes discipline. What we need to see here is first that God is at work all around the world. These great tectonic shifts taking place at Jeremiah's time are taking place now in a different way. And the church, we, the church, bear testimony to the kingdom of God at one of the most difficult periods of history, but also one of the most advantageous periods of history. Because just like I can sit in front of a camera, in front of my books behind me, and it goes out on the internet, and anybody that speaks English can access this recording. That's the first time in the history of the world. And so it's a time of great opportunity for the gospel, but it's very dangerous times. And it's times when all of the forces that are political, social, economical, but particularly spiritual, come to bear as God's kingdom is moving towards the end times. And that's why we're in Jeremiah. Hang with us. I'll explain history as we go. I'll remind you of names and dates, and I'll make it in such a way that we're always coming back and saying, oh, that's why it's important. And I look forward to being with you over the next videos.